All right, thanks for the intro. I'm just kidding, Jared. So thank you everybody for coming. I hope you're all as excited as I am that we're finally here today to learn a little bit more about solar in our community. My name is Mac Berger. I'm the village president here in Montgomery. Would like to very briefly introduce Doug Marisick, who's one of our board members in Montgomery, if you don't know him. Dan Geyer, who will be a board member next week, was recently elected. And Rich Young is our director of community development. And Jared Chipman is our senior planner. And where's Chris? Chris Wagner. Insert title. I don't want to mess it up. But Jared and Chris really put this whole thing together. So I really hope that you enjoy yourself tonight, take a lot of notes, learn. And if you want more information from the village about how to do this at your house, make sure you sign up your email address and that before you leave. So with that, I'll let Jared kick this off. And thanks for coming. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much, President Brawley. Before you this evening, we have several different speakers on kind of a variety of aspects of solar panels and solar permitting, and a presentation as well on our zoning ordinance updates and subdivision control ordinance update as well. So I hope you enjoy some of the presentations and learn a lot. Our first presentation is from Christina Uzo, who is the Environmental Outreach Coordinator for the Citizens Utility Board.
Great, thank you so much for having me, and thank you all for coming out tonight. So I have a quick presentation about some of the basics of solar and the incentives that are available for residents of Illinois. And then I'll also be talking about a program that CUB is doing throughout this summer in Kane County and a couple of the other surrounding counties. So just really briefly, before we get started, I work for CUB. How many of you have heard of CUB? Okay, almost everyone, so I'll be brief. We're a consumer advocacy organization. We're a nonprofit. We've been around since the early 80s. And since we were founded, we've saved consumers over $20 billion by fighting rate hikes. We also advocated for the Future Energy Jobs Act, which is commonly abbreviated as FEJA, and which is really responsible for the fact that we're seeing so many new solar companies coming to Illinois, and we're starting to really see the beginning of the solar boom in Illinois. So we were one of a bunch of different organizations working on that. We have a consumer hotline, so if you ever have any issues or concerns about anything related to your utilities, we can do our best to advocate for you or point you in the right direction of any resources. And then we do a bunch of public education events like this one, or like bill clinics where we'll look over your bills one-on-one and things like that. So you can visit our website to learn more. These are the topics I'm going to touch on. So solar in Illinois, you might be asking, is it sunny enough in Illinois, especially on a day like today? So we'll talk about that. Then we'll go through the different solar incentives. There's 3 main programs that make it really cost effective to go solar in Illinois. And then I'll be touching on this project that I'm working on, the Solarized Chicagoland group buy. So this graph shows the way that the module cost has declined for installing solar since 1976. So you can see that it's declined just exponentially. So this is the cost of installation, and then, or the cost of the modules themselves, the panels themselves. And then you can see that at the same time as this decline has happened, the annual PV installations, which PV is photovoltaic, so annual solar installations has just absolutely skyrocketed. In 2015, it was at 56 gigawatts, which is enough to power like 3 or 4 states, including Illinois. It's a ton of solar, and that's globally. So we don't have that much installed in the US yet, unfortunately, but we're on our way. So this is just a visual of the fact that we've come a long way and solar has become so much more affordable, but a lot of people aren't aware of that yet and still think that it's not going to be attainable to them. So we like to talk to people about the ways that it's becoming more affordable. So you might think that Illinois doesn't get enough sunlight, and it is true that we don't get as much as, our friends over in the southwest of the United States, but we still get a lot, and we still get enough where it is cost effective to go solar. And the comparison that everyone who works in solar in Illinois likes to make is to Germany, because as you can see, Germany here gets significantly less solar exposure than Illinois, but Germany has the highest installed amount of solar per capita of any country in the world. So if they can make it work in Germany, we can make it work here. We're much better off in terms of our solar resource than Germany. So in Illinois, right now, we rank 35th in the nation in terms of installed solar, but we rank 13th for growth projection, which again is because of that Future Energy Jobs Act. So we're in a really good spot in terms of growth. We're really emerging as one of the leaders in the Midwest, and that's very exciting. So this is just a little bit more about FEJA. It passed in December of 2016. It puts us on a path to achieve 25% renewable energy generation by 2025 statewide. And it mandates 4,300 megawatts of new solar and wind by 2030, which is really good. It's good that it requires that the generation be built here, that we're not just buying it from out of state or like offsetting it with credits, but that we're actually building it here. That's better for the grid. It's also better for job creation and things like that. And then the law also committed money to job training, which most of those programs are currently rolling out. So we haven't really seen the full impact of this yet. We're just starting to. So I mentioned that there's 3 main solar incentives. 2 of them are at the state level, and 1 of them is at the federal level that make solar that make it have a cost-effective payoff time for homeowners. So the first one is net metering. How many of you have heard of net metering before? Okay, decent number. So basically, when you have a solar system, there's going to be times where it's overproducing because it's producing a lot during the day when it's hot and sunny. And if you're not home to use all of that energy instantaneously, all of that excess gets sent back to the grid. And with your ComEd meter, it keeps track of how much energy you're pulling from the grid, like at night when you are using electricity, and then it also is able to keep track of all the energy that you're sending back to the grid. So the way that it flows through, wrong button. The way that it flows through your house is that it's generated at the panels, it flows through the inverter, and then it goes and powers anything that needs power in your house at that moment, and then if any excess then flows to the grid. And each state has their own net metering law. And so in Illinois, we passed ours in 2008, and it's a really strong net metering law because it requires that the main utilities, ComEd, Ameren, and Mid-American, that they buy back any excess power from you at the same rate that you're buying the power from them. So that's considered one-to-one net metering because you're getting paid at the same rate. There's lots of states where they're either trying to roll back a net metering program or they net meter you at like 40% of the rate that you're paying them. So you can see how that would impact the payoff time and make it a much longer return on investment. So that's a really good consumer-friendly law that we have here in Illinois. This is an example of a net metering bill. This is the back of your bill. Instead of just having 1 meter read number up here, it now has 2, and it says flows from the grid and to the grid. And then you get credited in all 3 sections of your bill. So there's the net metering credit under supply, under delivery, and then under taxes and fees. And this person's bill was reduced to $15. And this is an example of like a single family home. So it's never going to fully reduce your bill to 0 because there's still like the ComEd customer charge and things like that, but it makes a huge dent in your bill, and that's how you can achieve a good payoff time. And then the really important thing is that if you overproduce by so much that you end up producing more than you use that month, those credits roll over. See this net metering excess rollover? And you can use them in the next months up to 1 year. So they clear out in April, but it's designed so that your excess generation from like June, July, and August, which are really high production months, can help offset your bill in December, January, and February, and then it clears out in April right before we hit the peak of solar generation again. So the clear out is designed so that you get the biggest bang for your buck with those credits. And then if you have any excess left at that point, you do lose them. You'll never get a check. But ComEd limits the amount, the size of a system that you can install. So you can only install a system size up to 110% of your expected energy demand, or of your energy demand from the past 12 months. So that prevents you from getting into a situation where you're losing a ton of credits at the end of the year because there's a limit on the size that you can install. Any questions on any of that? Okay. So that's the first program, net metering. The second program is the federal investment tax credit. And so this is a credit where it'll take, right now for this year, it'll take 30% of the total solar installation cost and give you that as a credit on your federal income taxes. And you can see that this amount is unfortunately stepping down. So if for solar systems installed in 2019, it's 30%. And then in 2020, it drops to 26%, then down to 21%, and then it goes away. So if you're thinking of going solar in the next couple of years, you should do it this year, but definitely do it before 2021. This credit is a federal credit. It's been extended before, so it might be extended again, but that's dependent on Washington, D.C., so do it now if you're gonna do it. And so this is just based on the total installation cost, as I said, and then if you don't pay that much in income taxes, the benefit of this credit is that it rolls over for up to 5 years. So if the credit ends up being larger than what you owe that year in taxes, it can roll over for up to 5 years so that you're able to get the full benefit of that tax credit. Because it is non-refundable. So again, it's not going to come to you as a check, but that ensures that you're really, really, really likely to see the full value of that. And then the third credit the third incentive program is, again, a state of Illinois incentive program, and which was created by the Future Energy Jobs Act. Everything kind of ties back to the Future Energy Jobs Act. But it's a program known as SRECs, which stands for Solar Renewable Energy Credits. And so the way that it works is that, as I mentioned, Illinois wants to get to 25% renewable energy by 2025, and part of the way that they want to do that is by counting your generation on your home towards their overall goal. But they legally can't do that without paying you for it. So they've put a price on your expected generation over the next 15 years, and they give you that money all up front. And then that gives them the legal ability to claim it as part of their generation. But it's really a win-win because it's easier for the state of Illinois. They don't have to do the logistical work. You're the one getting quotes and doing that. And then it's easier for the homeowner because this amount can total to around 30 to 35% of the installation cost. So when combined with the federal tax credit, it can cover, those two can cover like 60% of the installation cost within the first year of going solar. So this is a really, really good program. This is why we're seeing companies from all over the country set up shop in Illinois, is because of this program specifically. So the way that it works is that this isn't just like a flat percentage rate the way that the federal investment tax credit is. It's based on how much your system is expected to generate over the next 15 years. So it's dependent on the specifics of your roof and location and your solar exposure there, the number of panels and type of panels that you install, and then that's used to estimate your output over the next 15 years. So this is an example of how these credits kind of all compound. There's this is the average installation cost for a 5 kilowatt system. The average system, I need to read you these numbers because the average system is slightly larger than 5 kilowatts, but then the credits scale up and you end up with a similar payoff time either way. But this is the federal credit taken off and then the SREC, and I did this math assuming pretty conservative output. So this is a conservative estimate, leaves you with $4,300 out-of-pocket cost and estimate $50 a month savings that this system would pay for itself in 7 years. And this is common payoff time with these incentives in Illinois. So it's a really, really good time to go solar in Illinois. We're really in this sweet spot right now of the federal credit still being the highest that it's going to be, and then these new programs from Illinois are just now starting. So it's a really good sweet spot. And the one really important thing to note with this is that both of these credits, the federal credit and the SREC, are only available to you if you purchase the system and you're the owner of it. So if you lease a system from a company, they maintain ownership of it and they get the SREC and they get the federal credit. So you're signing like a 20-year contract with them, and you won't ever get to the point where you've paid off your system and you're just saving money every month. So that's a really big, important consumer advocacy part around solar that we like to make sure everyone knows about. And in the packet that I handed out, there's a thing that says free solar panels, question mark, that talks about this issue of leasing versus owning. Yes. Oh, no, that includes installation cost is total cost, yeah. Yes. Yeah. So basically, the state of Illinois wants to be able to count the solar power that you're going to generate on your roof towards their goal. And in order to do that, they have to pay you for the expected generation. So that's why it's based on the specifics of your system rather than just some flat percentage rate, because a same size system on your house is going to generate slightly different amount than on your neighbor's house because maybe your roof's facing a little bit different, or there's a little bit of a tree blocking or something like that. So since it's based on the amount that you're going to generate over the next 15 years, the value has to be tied to your expected output. So the solar installer that you work with will enter all the specs of your system and your location and everything into this form on the with the Illinois Power Agency, and that will output a number of what you're expected to generate over the next 15 years. And then for every 1,000 kilowatt hours of renewable energy that you generate, there's a value assigned to that, and that's what the REC value is. So one REC is equal to 1,000 kilowatt hours of solar generation that you are putting onto the grid. And then they pay you for that all up front, the state of Illinois. And that money comes from, it's ratepayer money. So on your ComEd bill on the back under taxes and fees, there's a really small, it's 1/10 of a cent per kilowatt hour charge that's, it says renewable portfolio standard or something like, renewable standard or something like that. So like I said, it's 1/10 of a cent per kilowatt hour. So that's where the money for this program is coming from. So it's charged on your ComEd bill, but then it goes into an account that's managed by the state. It's not like ComEd is paying you for this. It's ratepayer money. Did that help? Okay. Yes.
Your slide that was after this, when you were showing that, say they have like 7 years, 3 months, whatever like that, before it pay off. Just out of curiosity, what is the projected life expectancy of the solar panel? Do we get at this 7-year mark? And it's about 50% life now, so we're looking at possibly rolling on ahead to install another set.
Yeah, the typical, most manufacturers' warranties are for 20 years. But what we've seen is that solar panels tend to last a lot longer than that, like 25 or 30 years. And they're all rated to decline in output by like 0.5% per year. So they don't really decline in output that much. So it's not like it pays itself off in 7 years and then it also tanks after 7 years. They really keep working for a long time. You might need to get some of the inverters replaced, but the panels themselves keep outputting at high values for a long time. Any other questions? I'm sorry. Yeah. Sorry, it's hard to see. Huh? Yeah, so is anyone else in that situation where you have a municipal utility instead of ComEd? Okay, it's still a good question. So no, it's okay. So since they are municipal utilities, they're not regulated in the same way as ComEd and Ameren, so they aren't held to that same net metering law. And I've talked to the person who runs net metering at St. Charles, and so I know, but that you get paid at the wholesale value of electricity instead of the retail value of electricity, which I think is like 60% of the retail rate that you pay. So the net metering is a little bit less. I can send you the information if you talk to me afterwards. The other issue with that is that the SRECs, the SRECs were designed to be available to everyone in the state of Illinois, but ComEd challenged it because the money is only charged on ComEd and Ameren bills. It's not charged on your St. Charles bill. And so they're challenging it and saying municipal utility customers shouldn't be able to get this money. And that went to court, and it seems like it's going to go in favor of, it's going to go against ComEd so that it would be available to you, but we are waiting, and it could be any day that the decision comes out because they already heard oral arguments. So there's a little bit of a question mark there, and I can keep you, if you give me your info, I can keep you posted, but glad that most people aren't in that kind of gray area. Yeah.
Touch on approved vendors and how we can get.
Yes, so this is an important point. He asked if I could touch on the idea of an approved vendor. So any solar company that's doing business in Illinois has a license to operate in Illinois, but then separately from that, solar companies can choose whether or not they want to become an approved vendor with the Illinois Power Agency under the Adjustable Block Program, which is the program that has the SRECs. And if the company is an approved vendor, then they can directly connect you to your SREC value, because the SREC is technically a contract between the approved vendor and the state, so that the state has someone that's like on the hook for the next 15 years, if for some reason your system's like malfunctions and stops generating. And they don't want to have to be in those contracts with every single homeowner that goes solar, because that would get really confusing and kind of like put the homeowner on the hook when really it's like would be the system's fault. It's not the homeowner's fault if the system stops generating. Does that make sense? So they want to be in this contract with a company. And so each solar company can choose whether or not they want to be the approved vendor, which means they're on the hook for the state for the next 15 years, and they're able to give you that money directly. Because the money belongs to you, but it just has to go through the approved vendor. If your solar company is not an approved vendor, they have to work with a third-party organization that is an approved vendor. And those companies, since they're not making money off of your solar installation, like they didn't sell you the panels, they didn't come out and do the work, they make their money by taking a cut of the SREC, like up to 10% or so. So that can eat into the SREC value, and it's really easy to search on the Illinois Power Agency website. I can if people give me their email addresses, I can send it to you, but it's really easy to search for see whether or not someone's an approved vendor. But mainly the main thing would just be when you get a quote from someone, ask them, say, how are you going to get me my SREC? Is it going to come directly through you, or are you working with someone else? And that's something that they will be talking to you about anyway, so just make sure you ask, how am I going to get my SREC? And again, this is all for purchasing systems. All of this talk of SRECs and the tax credit is for systems where you purchase it, not lease it. So just ask that, how are you going to connect me to this SREC? And that will, if they start talking about some other company, then you know that they're not an approved vendor, and that likely that company's going to take a cut of it. Yes. SREC. Yeah, it stands for Solar Renewable Energy Credit. I think I saw a couple other hands, and then I know that we also have to get to other people.
Yeah, if I may, we do have time for questions at the end, because that's what this event is all about, is to answer your questions. But I also want to give the other presenters a chance to speak, because they may answer some of those questions in the meantime.
Okay, sorry about that.
No
Okay, I just have a couple more slides. So we talked about leasing versus owning. It still can be a large, financial investment, that money up front that you owe before you get those credits. So there's a lot of low interest credit union loans out there, and EnergySage.com keeps a list of all of the loan providers that have loans specifically tailored to solar systems. So that's a really good resource to check out. You can also get a bridge loan a lot of these loans are designed to not penalize you if 1 year in you make a really big payment on it because you just got your SREC or you just got your federal tax credit. So they're kind of designed around the specifics of how you might be paying off your system. And then one more thing to touch on is that if you are going to be selling your home, at some point, solar increases the value of the home a lot. Zillow found that solar homes tend to sell for 4% more than similar non-solar homes. There's been studies that also have found that homes that have solar sell more quickly than similar homes that don't have solar. So this is something that is an asset to the next person that's buying your home, because they're just going to be inheriting the system. They don't have to pay anything for it, and then their energy bills are just reduced for the lifetime of the system, which, as I said, lasts for a long time.
But the SREC would only go to the original owner, correct?
Yeah, the SREC only goes to the original owner, but the value that you're seeing is that your utility bills are your electric bills are significantly reduced. And then, this is my last slide, the first page in that packet that I handed out to everyone talks about Solarized Chicagoland, which is a large consumer education campaign that CUB and the Midwest Renewable Energy Association are doing throughout the Chicagoland area this summer. And so if you have neighbors or friends that might be also curious about solar, or if you want to hear more, we're doing a bunch of events. I'm working on planning some in Aurora, but we already have a bunch in Kane County, and you can see the full list on that website on the flyer that I gave you. And we're working on securing discounts that will go along with this program, but that's like to be determined. But if you sign up for updates, we should know about what the discounts and the special pricing will be within the next month or so. So sign up for updates, and you can stay tuned on that. So that's everything I had. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much, Christina. Up next, we have Marc Berger, solar consultant with 7 generations ahead, and I'm going to get his presentation up and running. Thank you, Marc.
Okay, thanks very much. Okay. Hope I remember all that. Well, good evening, everyone. I'm impressed by this crowd. I know Montgomery's not a very big place, but I've seen you have as big a crowd for an Earth Day event as communities 10, 20 times your population, so kudos to you guys. Yeah, my name's Marc Berger. I'm a solar consultant for 7 generations ahead, and we do all kinds of environmental stuff in getting it to be mainstream into the economy. Things like farm-to-table transactions so that farmers can directly benefit more from selling their produce and other products in communities like Montgomery or elsewhere in the Chicago area in the Midwest. Also, zero waste programs focusing on school districts, government units, hospitals, and the like that can actually reduce their costs, because that's one thing that we're really big on. I mean, we care very much about our environment, and you know what? I'm going to stop saying, this is a habit I got into, you know, like we're caring about our children or grandchildren. The heck with that. We have to care about it right now, because actually most of us are going to be around if things continue in a poor manner. We're going to know about it. So, you know, forget the kids, forget the grandkids. We got to deal with this stuff now. I'm going to start, hopefully I won't bore you, but if you're going to start looking at making an investment in solar where you're going to spend a lot of money, I'm happy to say 10 years ago to buy a solar system that would probably take care of the electricity for an average house, that'd be about the cost of adding a room onto your house. About 5 or 7 years ago, the cost got reduced to doing a kitchen upgrade. Now it's a bathroom upgrade. I mean, it's gotten really cheap. This is like flat screen TV land for home improvements. And for those of you that may have priced doing a home improvement, I doubt if very many things for your home has declined in price, as opposed to installing solar that will reduce your electricity bills. I don't know about eliminating them, and you're going to still have the meter charge and a couple other little tax thingies, but you're going to really save on your money. But I'm going to do a few kind of boring things, so you got to start thinking about this stuff. You got to start thinking about watts in terms of capacity. 1,000 watts equals a kilowatt. 1,000 kilowatts equals a megawatt. And then there is the time factor in consuming, typically watts per hour. How many watts over an hour do you use or are you going to generate? So 1,000 watts will be a kilowatt hour, 1,000 kilowatts will be a megawatt hour, and I'm going to stop there. Some other rules of thumb, and hopefully I'm not putting you on the spot. How many of you know how much electricity you consume? You guys are batting above your average. Because when I get this crowd, it looks like about 50 people, and I ask that question, maybe one or two raise their hand. So that's good, but that's some homework for you. Go back and figure out how much electricity you use for the year, because this is going to help you decide and arm you when you go out to, when you start pricing this stuff, exactly what you're going to need. Rough rule of thumb, I'm going to say 7,500 kilowatt hours a year would be for an average house, whatever that is, that's gas heated, gas hot water, and gas cooking. So if you're all electric, you're going to use a lot more. If you're like a McMansion, you're going to use a lot more. If you're in a little apartment, you're going to use less. So, but 7,500 is a nice number to start working with. Roughly speaking, you'll need about 500 square feet typically on your roof, although it could be somewhere else. If you have like enough land, you can put it on the ground or something like that. Roughly 500 square feet will give you your 7,500 kilowatt hours a year. Now, that's a conservative estimate because every year new models of panels come out and they get a little bit more efficient every year, so that same amount of electricity can come from a smaller bunch of panels or modules, as they're called. But 500 square feet is a nice working number to start with. And if you're looking at big stuff, I don't know if anyone here has a big commercial operation or you're thinking about school districts, park districts, or any of that kind of stuff that you might put something on there. A megawatt is about a football field, roughly. 2 megawatts would be about 2 football fields. That's about the maximum size for a photovoltaic installation that would not be considered utility scale. And essentially, you don't want to go there because I can spend hours and hours boring you about it as opposed to trying to get by here in a couple of minutes and not bore you too badly. So the Illinois market is just getting started. Interestingly enough, 20 years ago, when we had the first renewable portfolio standard, Illinois kind of jumped out in the lead. We actually, for a very brief time, were the #2 solar market behind California. And that lasted about as long as one of our baseball teams being on top before they do the usual summer. Anyway, we are way behind. We're deep in the second division. We're starting to pick up, but we got a ways to go. And I don't know how many people here are concerned. I mean, I'm sure you're concerned, but really concerned about the big picture with environmental issues like, the Paris Agreement, the United States Green New Deal proposal, and all that stuff. Well, you can kind of put that aside for right now because you can make things happen. The action is going to be at the state level and at the local level. So each of you can really do something to make a difference. So we're just starting here in terms of solar power. Most of our renewable electricity comes from wind power, almost all of it. We're just about 0.1% of our electricity in the state comes from solar power. And that's about a few thousand installations. Give you a comparison, California has almost 1 million installations. They're only like about 4.5 times bigger than us, and they got way more than 4.5 times the number of solar installations. But of course, it's always, sunny out there, supposedly. Not really. And a little over 100 megawatts, so roughly about 100 or so football fields of solar panels. And some people might tell you, we can't have too much solar for all kinds of, I'll be a technical term about it, dumb reasons. But one reason is, we're going to have to cover the entire state with solar panels to get that. No, we're not going to have to. If we were to go 100% solar in Illinois, from all of our electricity from solar, I don't know, somebody tell me about what percent of the state would we have to cover with solar panels? Give me a guess. 37. Not even one. Not even 1%. Actually, that can pretty much, we can use our land, but that can mean parking lots, all these flat roofs, warehouse all over the place. We don't have to cover the state with solar panels. I mean, you don't want to have just, I love solar, but you don't want your only source of energy to come from solar. You want a diverse portfolio. It's just going to be a very different kind of diverse portfolio than what we had in the last century, because this is 21st century stuff. And that number of megawatt hours looks big, but it is not even a rounding error in terms of what the state uses. So now you can go shopping. With the Future Energy Jobs Act that is just now starting to get rolled out, when you get down to it, you have no excuse, more or less, that to get solar for some or all of your electricity. If you can't put it on your property, you can buy it off-site. You'll be able to buy it through community solar programs, or if you're a very big user, you can get through a power purchase agreement. You got all kinds of options to get solar. It may not be on your building, but it's going to be somewhere in the ComEd service territory or most likely in the state, because this is about putting in new stuff in our state, in our service territory, in our communities. That's what's important about this legislation and about all the stuff coming on there. And you can also, does Montgomery have municipal aggregation? Okay, it's something to think about. You can actually get a portion of your solar and you can shop for it and get a competitive price, because that's the other thing. Everyone keeps saying, well, you're going to spend more money for solar. No, you're not. If you do enough shopping, you can get your solar, including on a big scale, buying it. If you go long enough, you have to do a long enough term deal, it can be competitive with just about any of this electricity that is out there. You just got to do a little bit of shopping. But there's all kinds of cool stuff out there. So this is just a real fast thing, okay? You got a roof. You heard about, you can put it on your property, you can put it on your roof or somewhere on your property, get net metering, and yeah, the choice is, leasing was a real big deal. That's kind of cooled off a little bit. There's also the option within leasing, and leasing, you can be just buying a fixed amount, like leasing a car, or you can do what's called a power purchase agreement, just buy the electricity that's generated off of there. But generally speaking, if you have a tax appetite and you have any kind of good credit, you should be able to finance a solar system. You can certainly use a second mortgage, and that way you can take the interest deduction, assuming you have that kind of tax liability or tax appetite. Of course, consult with your accountant or other professionals. So forget what I just said. But this just gives you an idea of what you can do. You got options that can really save you money in all kinds of ways. So you don't have a roof. Well, again, you've got options. You can buy solar electricity as a resident. If how many people here do not own their house? Wow. Okay. So that's what I'm not used to here. All you are good homeowners. But if you've got places where there is restrictions, even though the state of Illinois does not allow restrictions, but or you have a bad roof, or people live in apartments or condos or something like that, community solar is their option. Or if they just don't feel like putting it on their property and they want to get it from somewhere else, again, community solar can be their option. And as I mentioned before, you can buy a small amount through community solar subscriptions, or if you're a big user, and I'm going to call a big user, roughly speaking, if you're using more than 1 million kilowatt hours a year, you can do a separate power purchase agreement. So there's all kinds of options. Also integrating it into the municipal aggregation. Whoops, sorry. So what's come down from the Future Energy Jobs Act? Well, you saw before all those numbers about how much solar we have. We're going to probably have about enough solar that we're going to grow an order of magnitude once this stuff is installed by the year 2020 or so, that will go from 0.1% of our electricity to 1%. Because besides money and funding and installations for residences and non-residences, there is also a lot going on with utility scale, which is the stuff that's bigger than 2 megawatts, and most of those installations are like 100 megawatts. And those are actually integrated into utility programs, interestingly enough. Not too much within Illinois. They're being integrated in programs like in Indiana and other kinds of places. Some of them in Illinois, but within Illinois, we're gonna grow by an order of magnitude. So we'll go from 0.1% of 1% to 1%. That's the fun part. The not so fun part is we've kind of run out of money this year. So you can still get your stuff in. It's not too bad yet for residential and other kinds of small-scale solar, but we're running up against the clock in terms of the amount of funding. And there's legislation that's being proposed that will fix that both in the short term and the long term. What we thought was going to be 3 years worth of money is going to last like 3 months. But, you know, it shows it's successful. And so we'll go from a few thousand installations to, I say we're going to bump up close to 10,000 installations, which is nice. We just need 100,000 installations or even 1 million installations to really make a difference. And then along with all the other stuff, with more wind power, with energy storage, with the smart grid that ComEd has spent a lot of time and your ratepayer money developing, using new sources of bioenergy, primarily from waste products, from human and animal waste, and other things that are done so that it can actually balance and offset what's called solar and wind power intermittency, which is not really that bad, but it's nice to have an additional renewable source, because, you know, we're always going to make waste of some source or another. So as I mentioned before, the good news is we jumped an order of magnitude. The challenge now is we have to get to the next order of magnitude. There are 2 pieces of legislation in the works. The short-term solution, which will fix things, is the Path to 100 bill, and then the long-term solution, which will get us on the way to 100% renewable energy by the year 2050. And yes, it is possible, and it's very doable. I know there's a lot of disagreements about that, and I would say that's a subject for another time to have a discussion on, but it's quite doable, and certainly we can get a big chunk of it on the way in the next decade or 2. So looking forward, keep an eye in the Illinois Power Agency website, and the easiest thing is just Google Illinois Power Agency, because the actual website is a terribly long, annoying thing. And there are 2 programs to follow. Which is going on right now is the Illinois Adjustable Block Program, which is illinoisabp.com. And then if you have any interest in low, moderate income populations, communities, or applications, which can be like senior housing and that kind of stuff, you can look at the Illinois Solar for All program, which is Illinois SFA. I think I got it right. That will cover that program. That's going to start coming up next month. And the amount of money that's there will probably disappear like a snowball in a furnace. You can follow our organization, 7 Generations Ahead. Another great organization to follow that can also help you with energy efficiency and all kinds of other stuff to integrate with solar development is Elevate Energy. And of course, my colleagues at the Citizens Utility Board. And if you're really interested in kind of the bigger picture on things, the Environmental Law and Policy Center, or simply elpc.org. Now, Montgomery has kind of stolen my thunder on this because I was going to talk about you want to have a municipality that's going to have good solar permitting process. Well, they've gone ahead, and I guess what, sometime next week or so, you'll find out from the Soul Smart program what kind of award you're going to get. You're very lucky because it can be very frustrating trying to do solar in a municipality that is, well, if they're not against you, they're not being very helpful. Because besides the time, it can cost a lot of money and a lot of aggravation and scare off a lot of good vendors that would be able to give you a good price. So that saves me a few seconds right there. Again, on the municipal level, you want to maybe think about aggregation, integrating that into your general product, because there's just many ways you can get solar as part of the electricity mix for your community. So the tax credits will probably start, they will start phasing out. I will say, I'll go out on a limb here and I'll say that there probably will not be anything good that's going to happen on the federal level for the next couple of years. So the tax credits are on track to start phasing out in 2020. So whatever you do, get something started this year so that you can make the case of getting the full tax credit of 30%. Next year it drops to 26%, the year after that 20%, and then it'll drop down to 10 by 2022. And be sure, just like anything else you're going to do for your house, get competitive bids from reputable, experienced contractors. I mean, this is new technology, but it ain't rocket science. And if you look at who are the approved vendors or the experienced contractors, there's enough business that's gone on in this state that you'll get enough experienced contractors to get a decent bid. Okay, thanks very much.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you very much for your presentation. All right, now that you've heard about some of the incentive programs and about things that are going on in the state of Illinois, I'm going to talk with you a little bit about what's going on here in the village and how you can take all of that knowledge. I thought there was a switch on it. How you can take all of that knowledge and get a permit and put it into practice. Could I see a show of hands for how many people are residents of the village? Okay, excellent. For all of you who are not residents of the village, please note that a lot of this may still be applicable because a lot of municipalities have similar processes. First of all, the village passed their solar regulations in 2011. We had an individual who was really interested in wind energy, and we put a moratorium on all permits for wind and solar for 6 months until we could come up with an ordinance. And this gentleman was very willing to work with us and give us that time. But that was really what prompted the village to take an early approach on solar. If you are out in the community and are in the All right, no feedback at least. If you're out in the community and in the Fairfield Way subdivision, you may see the wind turbine on top of the gentleman's house. So that's where we really got started, but while we were doing wind energy, we also wanted to do solar energy. Our website, ci.montgomery.il.us, contains our zoning ordinance, which is where all the regulations are held for solar installations. The regulations can be found in section 4.06. I know this is really exciting stuff, but it'll play into our next parts here. The regulations are divided into following categories: definitions, general provisions, roof-mounted solar energy systems, ground-mounted solar energy systems, and utility scale systems, which are the really large ones that If you're a homeowner on a lot smaller than a few acres, you're really not going to run into these. General provisions. Topics outlined in the general provisions section include appearance and signage, maintenance and abandonment, utility notifications and interconnections. We do require that all systems in the village be tied into the grid. Okay, thank you. Oh, there we go. We do require that all systems in the village be tied into the grid. So we do have a representative, Erin from ComEd, here. So if you do have questions, she may be able to answer them for you in regards to tying into the grid, or be able to get you an answer to those questions in the future. Contractors, the village licenses contractors, so pretty much anybody who does work in the village does have to be licensed through the village. Now that's not to say that that they are not licensed through other means, but any permit that comes across the village's counter, you have to have a licensed contractor for. Emergency disconnection is required, and then we do have a brief summary of solar access and easements. Basically, we stay away from solar access easements and allow you to work that out with your neighbors independently. Some municipalities have very stringent rules on ensuring that you have that solar access. Roof-mounted systems. A building permit is required. Things that we require for the building permit are manufacturer specifications for the panels. The systems are required to be certified by a licensed structural engineer. We want to make sure that the system is designed for your house. We want to make sure that you don't have issues with wind load or snow load or weight or anything like that. Most contractors that we've dealt with have not had any issues complying with that. Electrical plans shall be submitted. The plans need to comply with the NEC, the electric code for 2014 or newer, but the village has adopted the 2014 electric code. A site plan indicating the height location shall be submitted. I've got an example of that here in a little bit. And then roof vents shall be indicated on that site plan. Typically, these are things that the contractors prepare for you, but just things to be aware of. Height is not, the solar systems are not allowed to surpass the peak of the roof by more than a foot. So most of the time you see them on tracks. We had a couple of images from the prior presenters that showed them on tracks that are not very far off the roof. That's really what this is intended for. Roof coverage, the village allows 60%, up to 60% of your roof to be covered, and that is the front of the roof, the back of the roof. We do not make a distinction on that. Some communities do. Setbacks, it shall not extend beyond the edge of your roof. So once again, typically with the 60% maximum, you don't really have an issue with complying with that section of the ordinance. We also do allow for hot water systems. This is a little different. They're nowhere near as popular in Illinois as the PV, the photovoltaic systems, but we do allow for those, and they do not require a structural engineer's seal and signature, mostly because they're typically just smaller systems, and those are also allowed to be tilted at a greater pitch. Ground-mounted systems. Now, most of you are probably thinking that you would place panels on the roof of your home. Well, just in case you either have a lot of trees next to your house that would block it, or have a very large lot. There are some places in the eastern portion of the village that have lots up to several acres. So if they so choose, they can do a ground-mounted system. It is allowed in residential neighborhoods. Once again, a permit is required, and they're permitted in all districts. So commercial as well, and manufacturing. Permitted in the buildable area and the rear yard setback. I have an example of that here in the future as well. Ground mounted shall be located outside of an easement. So you can have them in the rear yard, but if you have an easement in your rear yard, it can't be located in that easement. So one distinction there. Maximum height in residential districts is 12 feet. All electrical wiring has to be underground back to the residence where your meter is going to be. System is required to withstand wind loads of 100 miles an hour. You may need a soils condition report. That is at the discretion of our village engineer and building official. Most of the time that won't be an issue, but in locations that we know are very sandy or have some issue with the soils, we may request that report. And then lot coverage. Lot coverage is on a calculation. I wanted to jump to this slide. So this is a little bit convoluted for what we're talking about, but basically I'm going to take this lot here and describe it. The red is your front yard, so solar would not be allowed in the front yard. You have side yard setbacks. Solar is not allowed in your side yard. Where solar is allowed for ground-mounted systems is on the area around the house, behind the front plane, that is not in a side yard setback, or in the rear yard. So you're able to have in the rear yard and what we call the buildable area. And this, of course, is minus any of the easements that may be running through your rear yard. So you're able to cover 40% of that area. Oops, excuse me. I also want to attach, this is just a general plat survey that I pulled off of a residential home in the village. You can see this is that easement line. So if you have your plat survey, you're able to find out pretty quickly the area that you would be able to cover. This is a little bit closer image of that plat survey, but then I also wanted to show you, this is a document submitted from a solar application that a contractor put together. And you can see this is the rear of the roof. It happened to be facing south, so they did go with the rear yard, or the rear roof. And you can see the panels here. They're located away from the vents, and it clearly does not cover more than 60% of the roof. So this was an approved permit. We've had 18 solar permits just this year in the village of Montgomery. So we've really seen an increase here lately. Utility scale solar, I'm not going to really dive into this much because most of you are probably homeowners and don't have 20 acres of land to build large panels on. Permit application. So our permit application is on our website, but we also did have copies out here. You may have noticed it's the document that has some yellow highlighted areas on it. Typically for something like this, it's a little more intricate than a patio or a fence. So typically the contractor applies for a solar permit. That doesn't have to be the case, but that's just kind of typical because of all the detail that we need to see. The contractor, as I mentioned, needs to be licensed with the village. Application review and approval does not take very long as we have all the documents. As Mark mentioned, the village is working towards the Sol Smart designation, which actually limits the number of days that the village has to review documents in order to move things along quickly. So I believe it's, my memory fails me. Is it 3? Thank you. I was going to say either 3 or 5 days. So 3 days. But in the first 3 days, we may have to ask for more information. And then once that information is submitted, we would have 3 more days. So it's a pretty quick turnaround for permits. We also have a solar landing page on the village's website. So if you go to the village's website and you can either navigate to it or there's a search bar and you type solar, it should take you to the landing page. Contractors. We wanted to touch upon this because we thought for sure this is a question that people would have coming out of the meeting. Now that you're armed with all this information, what do you do with it? Well, the village will not advocate for any contractor. We won't say, go with this person. That's not really our job. We do have a few contractors that are currently licensed in the village, and that list is on our website. There are also other resources that are available. We just found a couple lists. North American Board of Certified Energy Practitioners has a list of contractors, and then Illinois Solar Energy Association does too. Our other presenters mentioned that there's a list of contractors that have the SREC requirements. Did I find one of? Yes.
There's about 80 or 90 contractors that operate in the ComEd service territory that are either approved vendors or they're associated with approved vendors. So they've already been vetted by the Illinois Power Agency, not just for their, they have to be also certified under the Illinois Commerce Commission, any installer. So between those two, they'll be pretty well watched, not just for their technical skills, but also for their financial capabilities.
Thank you very much. Tax assessment, we tried to gather some information from local tax assessors. The information that we received, we reached out to all of our tax assessors. We have about 6 because there are different townships and then different counties. We received word back from 2 of those assessors. The one comment that we received was that at this point in time there would be no impact. Well, that was from one, so I didn't want to state that there would be no impact. From the second person that we heard back from, they said there would be little to no impact. However, if additional value is added through resales, so once they start seeing kind of the trend, this stance could be reevaluated. But they also went on to say that the assessor, they expressed a desire not to penalize residents for installing solar systems. So at this point in time, it sounds like there would be little effect on your assessed value for your tax bill. However, we definitely recommend reaching out to your the assessor that you live in, their jurisdiction, to verify that. Soul Smart designation, village's desire, yes, the village has a desire to lead in solar and extend that to our pursuit of Soul Smart designation. As Mark mentioned, we're really trying to get into that designation category. We have filled out all of the appropriate submittals for a designation. We're just trying to wait and find out what we have received, whether that be bronze, silver, or gold. So that more information should be coming out in regards to that here soon. The village is also a member of the Greenest Regions Compact 2, which is a regional Chicago conglomerate of municipalities that have pledged to work towards sustainable solutions. And then, that's going to be at the end. Prior to that, though, we have Jake Side from CMAP to talk a little bit more about the village's zoning ordinance and subdivision control ordinance update, or UDO, Unified Development Ordinance. So all the things I've talked about in regards to our zoning ordinance, they might be tweaked a little bit here in the future because we're doing a full rewrite. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Hi, everybody. My name's Jake. I work for CMAP, the Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning. I'm here with my colleague, Jared. Another show of hands, has anyone heard of CMAP before? Mayor Brawley? All right, awesome. That's better than usual. So we're here to talk about the Zoning and Subdivision Ordinance, also now known as Unified Development Ordinance. And since we do have so many property owners and residents in the room tonight, this is kind of a big deal. First of all, we're going to talk about who CMAP is for those of you who don't know who we are. Then we wanted to give you a brief review of our scope and talk a little bit about the timeline for this project. This is definitely going to have an impact on solar development, but like Jared pointed out, the village is already doing really well with renewable energy, so that's a great foundation to build on. Work like this, though, is going to have huge impacts when it comes to sustainable development throughout the village, so we're really looking forward to embarking on this journey with you. Okay, so who is CMAP? We're the regional planning agency for the greater Chicago area. 7 counties, 284 municipalities. Our big plan that's out there right now is the Onto 2050 plan. It was adopted in October of last year. This really sets the course for land use and transportation in the 7-county area going forward for the next 10 years or so. So why is CMAP funding this work here in Montgomery? Well, we receive funding through HUD, the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, the U.S. Department of Transportation, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, and CMAP created the LTA program, which stands for Local Technical Assistance, about 10 years ago. Village staff applied for this assistance, and the project was one of about 20 projects that was selected of over 80 applications. So it is a very competitive application process. And really the big goal here is to help communities to ensure a prosperous region overall. So what's good for Montgomery is good for Kane County, good for Kendall County, good for the region as a whole. Why partner with CMAP? Why not have the village do this on their own? Well, we do our work at very low cost to the village. We're also committed to implementation, so CMAP doesn't just write plans that sit on a shelf and collect dust. We also have a considerable depth of resources and technical expertise, reaching out to partners throughout the region, whether it's in government, nonprofits, private sector, or what have you. Okay, so what is a unified development ordinance? Well, basically, we're just trying to regulate development of land in town in a way that's easier to use for everybody. It includes zoning, subdivision, signs, and fully integrating all these regulations into one place so you're not hopping around the municipal code trying to find, what you need to do, whether it's for a solar installation or putting an addition on your home. One of the big things we're trying to do here is to implement the comprehensive plan, which was just adopted a few years ago. There's a lot of really good zoning recommendations in that document, and we want to make that a reality. And it also provides an opportunity for the village to engage with folks like you who are clearly interested in these issues. So we wanted to give you a sense of what the UDO might look like. It is kind of a complex document. We're just going to give you a little taste of what's to come here as we embark on this process. There's about 7 or 8 major sections of it. The first section is the administrative procedures. These are really the nuts and bolts of the ordinance, how it works in terms of the governing bodies in town, the application processes for things like special uses and variations, zoning amendments, that sort of thing. The next big part is subdivision of standards, and this has got a big impact on sustainability as well. For subdivisions, it's not just about subdividing a lot, it's also the size of blocks, the width of your street, whether it has a sidewalk or a bike lane for transportation issues. So making sure everything is connected and that sort of thing. The next major section is the zoning district standards. When we talk about district standards, it's a little bit about what Jared was touching on a moment ago: building height, front yard setbacks, rear yard setbacks, lot coverage, all the things that go into what make our neighborhoods look like the way they do. Another big portion of this is the design standards here. We're going to have design standards in the code for residential, commercial, and industrial properties. So this graphic here on the bottom of the slide shows you where your building would be located, where parking would be located, the entrance to the building, even things like the transparency of windows on the first floor. The next big section is uses. When we talk about uses, it's principal uses and accessory uses and structures. So for in a residential district, it would be a single-family home, let's say. And then for accessory uses and structures, we're not only going to talk about solar panels and wind turbines, but fences, garages, all the things that go into your sustainability plan, rainwater cisterns, green roofs, blue roofs, you name it. If it can be built, it's going to be part of the code. And then the last section of the ordinance is the on-site development standards. So basically everything else you do with your property. Putting in parking for commercial developments, landscaping. Landscape regulations go a lot to our stormwater concerns, particularly on a day like this, a week like this, where we're getting so much rain. Those stormwater components are really important. And then finally, signs. Signs have a huge impact on community character. Just making sure that we customize those to the various areas in town, whether it's here downtown in the Mill District or, out on Orchard or something like that. We also want to talk about what the document is not. A Unified Development Ordinance is not a planning document. We're here to refine the existing objectives that are in the comprehensive plan. So the other thing to think about here is that the document's not frozen in time. Once the new ordinance is adopted, it's going to be up to staff and the elected and appointed leaders in town to make sure that it's monitored and updated so that it continues to be a living document. Okay, and why do we need a UDO? Well, to some degree, the existing ordinances are outdated and sometimes difficult to understand. The big goal here is to make the regulations user-friendly for residents, for village staff, and for developers. Pretty much anyone who would pick up the code and need to understand it. We want to respond to changes in the community as it's grown over the years, but also in this time that the village is doing more planning and taking a good hard look at those ordinances. And finally, as I mentioned, to address the sustainability goals that are such a big part of the comprehensive plan. Our timeline for this project is going to be about 24 months. We've got 4 phases to the project. We're in phase 2 right now, which is assessing the existing regulations. So taking a look at things like the solar standards, the wind standards, seeing what works, what doesn't, getting feedback from people in the community to see what works for them. And then as we complete that process, we're going to go into phase 3, which is actually drafting the regulations. We're hoping to do that this summer and into the fall. And then hopefully sometime next year, have this document available for you to take a look at to see how this is going to impact your lives. We're going to make sure that we have a big public-facing portion of this process, and I'll show you the website that we have for our project as well. We've got a steering committee for this project that's made up of a wide group of members who are invested in this issue, village board members, plan commission members, local residents, business owners, that sort of thing. But we also want to highlight the role of residents and stakeholders, and that's you. Your job is to keep us on the right track. Ask questions when you don't understand something. Make sure that we're responding to the needs that you have, because really that's what this is all about. And so we've done a little bit of that so far, what we've heard. The big thing is that the ordinance needs greater clarity, less duplication, less need for interpretation so that you can just pick it up and understand it at first glance. Also a big focus on development here downtown in the Mill District, the types of uses that are important here, what building height should look like, what design should look like. And then the last one is fences. Good fences make good neighbors. So we want to make sure that we've got the right heights, the right materials, and we've also have a number of annexation agreements that are going to be expiring here in town over the next few years. So we want to be aware of that as well as we develop the ordinance language. Okay, I think this is my last slide. So next steps. We are doing what we call a recommendations memo right now, which is not really getting into the regulations themselves, but coming up with some initial recommendations based on our understanding of what's in the code. So that's going to include things like wind and solar, but also going to take a much broader look at what's in the code and how we can improve. Like I said, we're going to start drafting the ordinance in summer, fall, and winter. So it is quite an intensive process. It takes a little bit of time. But we encourage you to keep track of what's going on with our project website. It's cmap.is/Montgomery. And that, make sure you have a capital M in there. It's case sensitive for some reason. But basically with our outreach here, it's going to be front-loaded and back-loaded. So we're going to be doing a lot of public outreach towards the beginning of the project right now. And then once we've got some standards in place, we'll be asking you again to take a look at them and have something for you to respond to, so you're not talking to us in a bubble kind of thing. I think that's it. Yeah, now we know you guys have been patiently waiting to ask a bunch of questions, so I'm going to turn it back over to Jared here.
All right. Thank you very much, Jake. I saw a couple of looks earlier when I talked about the tax assessment and talking with the assessors. We actually have an update on this.
Yeah, I went through my notes on my phone. It's not supposed to raise your property value when you install solar, but you might have to like appeal. It's not supposed to, but if you feel that it has, then you can contact your assessor. And what I have here is that they might ask you to complete a state of Illinois P-Tax 330 property tax form, and that will reverse it, but it shouldn't increase the value. But it's still valuable to do what Jared was doing and actually reach out to the individual ones that are relevant here to make sure that they're aware of that or see what their process is for handling it. Did that address what you were talking about? Okay. Right, I think so, yeah. Yeah, so that's something that was taken into account.
With that, are there any questions of the panel? We also, as I mentioned, we have a representative from ComEd here as well.
If the state gives you this incentive, is that taxable? Will we have to put that on our taxes as an income? Yes,
So yeah, it depends. Can people hear me okay with this? Okay. It depends how you get connected to that money. So the most ideal situation is for your the installer that you're working with to be an approved vendor that can directly connect you with that money. And then if a lot of those companies are just taking the SREC value because they know what it's going to be based on the specs of your system, like I said, so they take that money right off the top and you never get charged for it. And so in that case, it's not taxable income because you're never seeing it as a check that you're cashing. But if you work with, if you go with an installer who either maybe they're a smaller company, they can't front it, or they aren't an approved vendor, so they're working with another company and you're in a situation where you're going to get a check, within a couple months after your system being electrified, then that would be taxable. So that goes back to what I was saying about ask, how are you going to connect me to my SREC? Because that there's kind of a couple different ways that it can happen, and it can have a big impact based on how they get it to you. You're welcome.
Having been burned by Illinois not paying its electric vehicle credit several years ago, is there plenty of money in the system for this year?
There's enough money right now for systems that have been approved under the Illinois Adjustable Block Program. The Illinois Power Agency will not go ahead and and approve any further plans if there's insufficient funding. So you should not. It's always good to just be careful on that and check with the Illinois Power Agency. But if they're not going to, they shouldn't go ahead if there's no funding. It's the Future Energy Jobs Act really tightened up things in the legislation in a lot of ways, which was a problem with how Illinois was dealing with the renewable portfolio standard and how they were paying out things. So there should not be that problem. Just you always have to check with the approved vendor and the certified installer just to make sure.
And then, yeah, just in terms of where we're at right now with that, the adjustable block program, which houses this residential SREC that we keep mentioning, also funds community solar and like larger scale solar, like if you're a business. And so, but they're all separate pots of money. So if you're a homeowner, you're not like competing against a community solar project to get funding, and they already opened up the application process, and community solar projects did have to go to a lottery because there were significantly more projects proposed than there was funding available. But so far, residential systems have not had to go to a lottery, and there's expected to be enough money available for this year, and then that money will keep getting added because it's not state tax money, it's ratepayer money, so it's coming from this one fund. So it's not like at the whim of Springfield to decide whether or not they want to put it in the budget each and every year, which should make it a little bit more dependable.
I just have one quick question I was going to jump in and ask. I wrote down earlier. The idea that you're going to pay for your system, or it's going to pay for itself, the break even is 7.5 years, let's say, based on that example, is predicated on the fact that this net metering continues. Was that bill written so that it will at least last that 10 years before ComEd could, let's say, stop paying us the one-to-one?
Yeah, it's based on what the state legislature wants to do, and because we've passed FEJA and there's talks going on right now to increase the renewable portfolio standard for FEJA. Like, Springfield is clearly very pro-solar, and so it would be a really big political turn to then be like, all of a sudden, no, we're not going to do this, because it's something that the solar industry wants, it's something that residents want. And so really it's more in states where it's like coal lobbyists getting involved, and like Indiana's having this issue right now where they're trying to roll back their net metering, but it's because of kind of fossil fuel special interests. So I don't see that happening. We have a strong law here and it should stay. And just for context, almost every state has a net metering policy. So it's not like we're lucky to have a good one, but it's not like we're some rare state. So I don't expect that to get rolled back.
Now, there can be something that can be an improvement that the Illinois Power Agency may work on, which could be as soon as the update of the Renewable Resource Plan that has to be scheduled for 2020. It's a metric called the value of solar, because the net metering, which is just the retail rate, it's a simple, you get your retail rate back, the 10 cents or so kilowatt hour. And there's been a lot of discussions about how to go beyond that. So if there's going to be any changes, it is most likely to be a change that will actually be beneficial, because it'll take into account things like the pollution avoidance of solar, the locational value of solar, that they would be in an area that, say, on a hot August afternoon, the sun's out, that electricity is way more valuable than retail rate and things like that. So it's a matter of just keeping track of what's going on. But so far, it's going to be the status quo of net metering, as retail net metering as it stands.
I don't know of any current plan to do carbon credits, but they might be. But it's a similar idea to the SRECs, because it's a credit that has a value that's based on the amount of renewable energy that you're generating. But it's just it's quantifying it in terms of the energy generated, and instead of in terms of carbon dioxide emissions avoided. So it's a similar idea, and I think that because we now have such a strong SREC program, that's probably going to be the route that we stick with. And it also, it avoids the issue of, having to then decide what we put as the social cost of carbon, which can get into all these political things that you kind of avoid if you just do it based on the amount that you're generating. So do you have anything else to say? Yeah, right.
The whole thing about carbon pricing or carbon taxes, and also you can throw in methane too, is really at a political loggerhead. Not just from us renewable energy folks, but between the nuclear industry, the natural gas industry, and the coal industry, and even the oil industry if it gets into transportation. All those things are really, they're third rail in terms of politics. I don't expect much to happen on that. I think, as Christina says, the closest we're going to get to it is some kind of is continuation of the solar renewable energy credits.
As far as that SREC is concerned, it would be calculated on a one-time basis, or would it be like an annual basis? So say we had 7 years, lots of sun.
Right, it's calculated one time and you get paid upfront. So they're making an estimation of what your system will generate over the next 15 years. It's a little bit of a conservative estimate so that you don't get into it, so that you're unlikely to get into a situation where you underproduce and don't meet that over the next 15 years. So that you're not in a situation where they're trying to ask for part of it back. So that's the way that's why it's a little bit of a conservative estimate, but it is one time for 15 years, and then it doesn't happen again after that. After that, you could, if you wanted to, sell your RECs on the public market because your system's going to last for more than 15 years, or on the private market, it's going to last for more than 15 years, and you're still going to be generating renewable energy. But at that point, your system will have already been paid off, and most people just probably won't, deal with the hassle of making the online account to sell it to, whatever company wants to offset their energy usage. So yeah, but the incentive we have here in Illinois is strong enough that most people of selling them yourself afterwards. Yeah, you could. Savvy people would continue to do that. That's how people have been funding solar. It's one of the ways people have been funding solar before FIJA. It's just you get checks like quarterly or yearly depending on the contract that you have. So it's not as helpful as selling it to the state with this new program where you get it up front for 15 years. But it could be something to consider afterwards.
You sold your house and you realized that gain, the next owner, would they be able to do that on the open market?
As long as it was after the 15 years.
Oh, after the 15.
Right. Because the 15, all of those are accounted for. Right.
Right.
But the value goes to the original homeowner. Yeah.
Keep in mind that your system is going to be registered on a regional network, so there's going to be kept track of. Now, this is for an installation that is up to 10 kilowatts of capacity. If you go over 10 kilowatts, like if you have a real big house, like a McMansion or something, or you got a lot of stuff that's going on, and you want to get more than 10 kilowatts, you can actually get a system that's bigger than 10 kilowatts and still be considered residential as far as under the interconnection agreement. But in terms of the SREC sales, it will no longer be a one-time upfront payment. You go over 10 kilowatts, you will get 4 annual payments. So it'll be a little bit different compensation.
But the average system size is 7.5 kilowatts, so most homes don't fall into that. But it is good to note in case you are charging like 3 Teslas or something. Yeah.
Does solar panels affect homeowners insurance?
It can a little bit, but they're really durable. So from what I've heard, it's really unlikely that it will increase your policy by very much at all. And there's a lot of policies where they're already included. You just might not even know that it's already included in what you're paying. So talk to your home insurance company, but it's a negligible amount.
And we did reach out to one insurance agent, actually a couple, but we did get a little bit of information back from one insurance agent within the village, and we summarized their comments in a sheet. They did recommend reaching out to your insurance agent. You may have to up your replacement value because if your house did burn down and you were at your standard rate prior to adding those panels, that they may not be covered. So you may have to look at elevating that rate of basically the amount that your house is worth for replacement purposes. So
One more on that SRAC real quick.
let me give you a microphone, sir, because we're recording this. So people may be able to hear you, but they won't on the recording.
Suppose I was to outfit a home, sell it next year, would I be eligible for this program in my next home?
Yeah, you would be. It's because
very
it's
good.
based on it's tied to each system. It's not tied to the homeowner. So if you owned 2 homes, you could put solar on both of them. It's not like limited by person. I think there were a couple other questions.
Get your steps in, Jared.
See Jared run.
I just heard at the beginning of this year, I don't know if this is true or not, but is there a system size cap for residential homes at this point? I heard that there was a 13 kilowatt cap for homes.
13, you said?
Something like that, yes.
I think it's 20 kilowatts for the interconnection that ComEd has. When you go above 20 kilowatts of alternating current, you're considered a non-residential or commercial installation.
So it's just, okay.
But
Go ahead.
10 kilowatts is for the cutoff for the SREC pot of money. You're put into a different category, but that's a different question from what you're allowed to interconnect.
The problem is right now with past 10 kilowatts AC is because all the huge commercial stuff, the community solar you've been talking about, they've taken up a lot of the funding. So there's a problem with, so you can't really guarantee homeowners if they go above the 10 kilowatt AC that they're going to get the SREC.
It's there's funding for community, there's a pot for community solar, and then there's a pot for, it's called large DG, which is large distributed generation, which is above, it's like between 10 kilowatts, and then the maximum is 2 megawatts, which is, I believe that's the maximum. So that you'd fall in, if you were above 10, you'd fall into that category, and you get paid out your SRECs over the course of 4 years for the next 15 years instead of upfront, like Mark was mentioning.
And
but
the
but you're not competing with community solar in that. It's still a separate pot of money.
And actually, it is more competitive, that pot, than the residential one.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying is like, because talking to the adjustable block program, like they're basically saying, like, especially with like Ameren, it's been pretty much, yeah, be careful. Don't go above 10 kilowatts AC if you're residential. Is that still not the case, or? That's what we're hearing from. Yeah. So basically, like, as a solar company, we want to protect homeowners, and like we're signing them up with a 10 kilowatt AC max system to make sure that we don't put them in a situation where, like, crap, you can't, like, because you can't even apply for, like, let's say you did put on a 15 kilowatt system, but you only wanted to apply for a 10 kilowatt system. We can't do that. The adjustable block program, we've talked to them, and they're like,
Right.
nope.
Yeah, I think it's a good rule of thumb. But if you look at the dashboard right now, the Illinois Power Agency updates the dashboard all the time with how many projects have applied. There is still funding available in that large DG category, but Mark's right that it's more competitive than than residential. It's not quite as competitive as community solar. It's kind of in the middle, but it is worth.
Right. And the 10 kilowatts is for really the inverter. So you can actually have 11 or 12 kilowatts of panels, and as long as that inverter stays 10 kilowatts, you're still in the residential small category. You'll just have a longer period of time that you can max out on it throughout the year.
So I just wanted to give an example. Just working as an approved vendor, what we do is for the SRECs is we actually will receive them ourselves, and then so there's no real risk to the homeowner because we just take it off the sale price of the system straight away. So if that's and that's the case for this gentleman's company here and a few other the companies that you work with. So if you're worried about there not being enough funding for you over the term, it'd be important to maybe seek out a contractor that receives it up front, puts it right in the contract, takes it off the price of the system for you, and then there's no real risk to you at that point.
I believe somebody said that you had to have this system tied to the grid. Is that a village ordinance, or is that something that's generally upheld?
Yes, that is a village ordinance. Part of that is because when we worked on the ordinance back in 2011, and we still potentially are concerned about storage. So if you were an off-grid system, you would have to have storage. For instance, a lot of battery in your basement. which humidity doesn't always work the best with batteries. I know battery technology is continued to progress, so it may not be as big of a factor, but that's what really led us to requiring the air connect. And also, the village of Montgomery is fairly compact, and pretty much all of the properties in the village have a tie-in with ComEd already. So we really didn't necessarily see the need unless you had a very small system attached to like a detached garage or something like that. So,
Tesla is supposedly going to be offering a home system where you can charge it during the day, and then you could take and charge your EV at night.
and I don't know if that Tesla system is still tied in, but that is something that, as the zoning ordinance is a fluid document, if we do see a good, valid reason to change that requirement, we would certainly hear it out.
You can have systems that have batteries that are still tied to the grid, and I think that's mostly what Tesla is aiming to do. Would be like install a larger solar system, and then buy their home storage batteries, and then charge your car with it. But that's kind of their high level vision. They're aware of like all this stuff with the 10 kilowatt limit and stuff, but that's their high up vision for the whole country, and they're not necessarily tailoring that to the different limits in the different states. So that's kind of like something that we'll be seeing more of, but that is maybe doesn't fit the best right now with the SRECs that are available. And then Mark wanted to say something else about that too.
Yeah, I believe also that if you're not connected to the grid, you're probably not qualifying for the SRECs, because part of the deal is you're connected to the grid and they can track it. So that's another reason why you don't want to go grid, off the grid. Certainly, you can look at having energy storage. Now, whether you have any reliability issues in your particular area, or you're starting to look at load shifting, that's a different story. And that's starting to evolve, especially as the energy storage components are now really plunging in price.
Right. And there's states like California and Hawaii where they're considering changing their net metering policies, because they're in a situation where they have so much solar now that they have this like glut of solar during the day that doesn't quite match up with peak demand, because demand for energy peaks in the evening. And so they're kind of trying to figure that out, and they're changing their net metering policies to favor battery storage. But we're nowhere near that point in Illinois yet. We don't have this issue of like, oh, we have this glut of solar during the day, because as Mark said, we're at 0.08% of solar generation. So the best thing you can do financially, like in terms of your payback period, is send it back to the grid. And that's really the best thing to do environmentally at this point too, is to send it to your neighbors to use, and then you get net metered for that.
And in the climate that we live in, is there an issue with solar panels on the roof with the snow that we get and being blocked, or is that a factor at all?
Yeah, if they're covered with snow completely, they'll stop producing for a couple hours. But a lot of times, because they're so smooth and your roof is pitched, the snow tends to slide off pretty quickly. So it doesn't. You do see less output in the winter months than the summer months, and that's part of why there's less output. But it's not significant enough to undo it completely. And I don't know I know there's solar developers over there that might have more to say about that.
Yeah, keep in mind that you can lose like the entire month of December, for example, and you're going to lose 3% of your annual output, 4% in January. So, I mean, you can lose like the whole winter, and that's like maybe 10% of your annual total. So it's a very minor issue if it's completely cut off. And actually, with some of the newer technologies, they sense light coming through the snow and the ice. They can still transmit electricity, just not as much.
So I have two questions, and then I think we'll probably wrap this presentation up. I think our presenters may still be willing to stay around for a few minutes to answer a couple more. But otherwise, we do have contact information for all of us. We're going to start to put, if it's all right with our presenters, the PowerPoints up on the solar landing page. The video will be on the solar landing page. And the PowerPoints contain the contact information. So, ma'am, I know you had a question.
So if I were to start the process now, what kind of timelines am I looking at, from applying for permits to getting the solar panels, or what kinds of solar panels, to getting them installed, to getting the credits back, all of that? Just a timeline.
Thank you. So I think your first step would be to reach out, or to do a little research and reach out to some installers, some contractors, to get proposals. Once you have a proposal that you're ready to take to the village, it's very quick. It takes us 3 days to review it as a maximum, unless, as I mentioned, if we need more information, we'll kick that back to the contractor. So, and then after that, to actually get it installed, that really depends on the contractor's availability, their scheduling, things of that nature. But as far as the village's process is concerned, we can have you through our process very quickly. Oh, okay. Okay, so one of the contractors said that there's a little bit of a step because the interconnect with ComEd. But from a permitting standpoint, it's very simple, so it's pretty quick from us. Did you have my last question?
I was just asking if, like, a Powerwall system, battery system impacts your SREC at all.
No, because your SREC is based on the amount that your system's expected to generate over the next 15 years. It's not based on the amount that you're expected to send back to the grid. So if you had a Powerwall, it wouldn't impact the SREC. It would impact the SREC if you were like a completely off the grid type system, but off the grid is kind of like this catchy phrase that we hear a lot that's not actually something that like financially makes sense for most people. And you know, in the case of Montgomery, it's not even allowed. So it's kind of more of a catchphrase rather than something that actually makes sense once you're seeing proposals in front of you. So you'd still qualify for the SREC.
All right, well, thank you all very much for coming out this evening. Hopefully you've gained quite a bit of knowledge, and I had a few questions answered. As I mentioned, we'll put a lot of these items on the website, and then we may be around for a little bit here for questions as well. Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you all for coming. Hi.
Matt Browley.
Nice to meet you. Thank you for having us. Thank you.